Hello and welcome to this edition of the Talking Aces podcast. My name is Paul Wilcoxen, joined alongside Scott Allen. And Scott, good morning to you. How is everything going for you?
Hey, good morning. Merry Christmas to everyone listening.
Yes, we're sitting here in the studios at Wabash Valley College recording our podcast. Also, we are going live for the first time here, Scott, on our new system. Of course, like I said earlier, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, does anybody listen? So I don't know if anybody knows that we're live, but that's okay. But yeah, Scott, it said that we can go up to 5 hours on this podcast. Can you imagine doing a podcast for 5 hours?
No, actually, I can't. I can't imagine talking about any topic in the world for 5 hours and having anybody care enough. But that's just me. I'm a quick read in general. So,
but we do have some interesting topics here to talk about today. One of obviously the big news out around the state of Illinois. And Scott, you've talked to a few people today and yesterday. It seems like that's the number one topic that people want to talk about is this football district proposal that was voted on yesterday.
Yeah, especially in a town like Mount Carmel, which is so geared to football historically. But this is topic A around town. We did have a basketball tournament game last night. Both the girls and boys are playing. And yes, we did watch a basketball game, but nobody was talking basketball. Even during that game, they were talking football, playoffs, implications, districts, and what all that means. And of course, it bears special interest to Mount Carmel because we're the only Illinois school that plays in an Indiana conference. We've been generally exiled there, if you want to use that term, for the past 16 years because of what this football district proposal is hoping to fix, the inequities and the jumbling of conferences and how everybody's been in a manic search for wins that almost every conference has shuffled itself. In fact, one shuffled itself out of existence that we're aware of, the North Egypt Conference in our area. And it led to Mount Carmel going its separate way off to Indiana because we couldn't find a home in Illinois. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's really, this thing hits as close to home for Mount Carmel as probably anywhere in the state.
Talk a little bit about, Scott. I mean, I think we went from several months ago from being that, there's no way that this is going to pass, but it'll be close. And then a couple of days ago, I remember you and I were talking, and you had spoken with some people up at the IHSA about how you think it's going to be really close. But I think still people were surprised that this thing passed yesterday.
Yeah, even as late as last Thursday, I talked with Matt Troha at the IHSA office in Bloomington, and I think he indicated that he fully expected it to be very close, but still probably not pass in the end. This is the third go-around for a proposal or one similar to this current one, 2009 and 2014, and it was defeated soundly in 2009 and defeated soundly, for that matter, in 2014, but it was closer, 70-30-ish roughly. And so when I heard from Matt last week that it was going to be much closer, and he gave me a couple ideas that I really hadn't thought of. And we talked about the Metro East schools seem to be showing support for this. And at first blush, you think, Edwardsville, why, they must know they're going to be under almost any proposed district alignment. All those Metro East schools are going to be going to Chicago every weekend for not just the playoffs, but the regular season. Well, and then it dawns on you, really, that's what's going on now, that to find people to play, they really do have to travel. And there's a few halfway points. They play in Champaign. Somebody comes down from the north. But it's already become a scheduling nightmare for these schools. So I think a lot of this is ADs and school officials are tired and basically throwing up their hands in a lot of situations. And they're happy now because the IHSA will solve that for them. They will assign the schools to districts, and this will be who you have to play now, make it work. And so it takes a lot of schools off the hook, I think, from that angle. But so Metro East was showing support, which I hadn't really thought about. I figured the Peoria schools probably liked it. There's been a lot of, it doesn't seem like anybody wants to play the Peoria schools. They've been good in a lot of things. They're city schools, and so they've been jumping around conferences. They had an allegiance with the Springfield League for a while, and now they're in the Big 12. They kind of attached themselves to the three remaining schools in Peoria. I think it's three. It's four, actually, with the private school Notre Dame. They've attached themselves to the Big 12 now. But so they've been looking for a home. And, they historically, they grew up in the Mid-State 9. You played Pekin and East Peoria and Limestone. And those schools have all gone to the Mid-Illini and other places across the river. And so Peoria was kind of nomadic in a way. They were kind of looking for a home. And so I think they generally probably supported this. And then Matt said something else, too, about the small schools who would find themselves in what we would view as stable conferences. And I know that's almost a misnomer because there are no stable conferences, but conferences that through all of this have kind of stayed together a little bit and not undergone too much upheaval. But small schools, and you think that they'll be happy there, or the impression they give to outsiders that they're happy. But some of those small schools have suddenly become kind of retrospective about this. They're going, here's our chance to get out. I mean, we're okay now. We're competing now, but we're a small school in a bigger conference. What will happen when that ends, or when our competitiveness ends, or when things change? Is this the best opportunity we've got now to change it and to get out? And we found, I believe, and we haven't seen the analysis of the vote totals, and I'm not sure we ever will, but Matt Troja was indicating that some people he had talked to were showing that some of those small schools were suddenly thinking, hey, this is our opportunity to get out and to do probably what's better for our program. Even though we're perfectly happy right now in this conference, this is a chance. So there were signs that there would be chinks in the armor, so to say, and that this might be indeed closer than it is. And it was close in the end. I mean, it wasn't much of a plurality here in the scheme of things. It was over 50-50, and by a little bit. I think the final total was 324 in favor, 307 opposed. Now, the other interesting thing is there are 69 schools that I guess didn't cast a vote or abstained or whatever. First of all, this was the highest plurality of schools voting, and all schools could vote, not just football schools. 86% voted in this matter. What did they say? That was about the highest they've ever had. But there were 69 who didn't cast a vote. Some of the people that were opposed, only 17 difference between the yays and the nays. So I imagine a lot of the naysayers that were hoping for a yes vote would like to jump on those 69 and goes, what was your deal? Why didn't you vote?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I have to imagine there are more than 69 schools that don't have football. But I've kind of wondered if those
there were a lot of those schools.
Yeah, a lot of those schools that didn't have football, they did not want to seem like they're putting a say into it.
And that's what I'm thinking too. But all schools could vote. I mean, the Grayvilles and North Cities of the world could all vote for this because it was a bylaw change. But you're right. I think probably most of those votes came. I can't imagine anybody who had a skin in the game didn't cast a ballot. This is what I'm thinking.
I think a lot of coaches, a lot of ADs right now are kind of playing the fence a little bit as far as they're trying to do the pros and cons. I'm sure if you talk to them deep down, they probably have a very strong opinion, but they're trying to be positive about it because it's one of those things right now is there's no sense really going out and criticizing it because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
it's fast.
Yeah. So, talk about one of the big reasons too. You kind of touched on it a little bit as far as conferences. This seems like it's been one of those things. I mean, you could probably go back a lot farther than this, Scott, but definitely in the last 15, 20 years, a lot of these stable conferences are now breaking up because of football. That's one of the things. I think that's what people think that is the major reason why this district was coming around is because a lot of these conferences were breaking up and everything too. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, excuse me here. Well, we know of one conference that did. The North Egypt was one, but almost every conference around her. I mean, the Little Illini Conference. Look at that. That is a conference that's undergone tremendous changes in the last 15 years. From a small school league, Edwards County was happy there for years, and Palestine was in that league, and Cumberland, and all these other little schools, and suddenly the pressures of football and getting together as a group with bigger schools, suddenly that allure was there, and the little schools all got kicked out. They eventually went to other conferences. And so the LIC is an example of a school that's undergone titanic changes because of the pressure of football and the counting of the wins, and now look what they've become. So that's just one example. Will we ever get back to the day when post-football, when that pressure is off now to organize conferences based on that? Do you think we might get back to a time when conferences can align for all the right reasons? Rivalry, geographic, and size doesn't necessarily matter, and it doesn't. I don't think in basketball, and I don't want to get too far off the beaten path here, but basketball doesn't face the same pressures that football does. In basketball, you have two really good players. You're going to go a long way in the state tournament series, no matter your school size. So you don't even need five. But you still need a quality team, good coaching, and everything else, and so on. But in football, the ability to have a good team is so much different because of the numbers involved and personnel-wise. So basketball doesn't face the same kind of pressures and that football does. So maybe the size of the schools won't make as much of a difference in basketball-only conferences. And, yeah, probably there will be a period of instability again, and those people that didn't like the district proposal will go, see, it didn't solve this problem. I think the next 8 to 10 years you'll still see shuffling. I think it'll eventually settle down a little bit when post-football, when conferences can align for, again, go back and align like they used to 100 years ago, 50 years ago, for all the right reasons in theory. So, so that's just one example of a conference that didn't, and it's not just happening here. I mean, boy, every conference is jumbled. I mean, you look around here. I mean, the river to rivers kind of come up and been relatively stable, but that was even a league that began to tear apart earlier because of football. And the Southwest Egyptian is no longer. They joined the river to river, and so. Schools have been, even around here, have been looking for homes and better fits for a long time. And it's made it tough in areas like Southern Illinois because the towns are miles apart. The towns are different sizes. You know, it's not so the changes, the upheavals have come more in the suburb schools and area elsewhere in the state because you're not talking about 35, 40 miles between towns. You know, you're talking the next block is another school in Chicago and in the suburbs and which way are they going? And so it's been easier to shuffle them up there. It's been harder down here, and yet it still happened. And so the Apollo Conference, another example. I mean, Lincoln in the Apollo Conference, Muhammad Seymour in the Apollo Conference. So
that's one of the reasons why Salem left the Apollo Conference is because of the travel that they had to have done. They would have had to have done to get to some of these games. They ended up going to the Cahokia Conference, and like you mentioned, the River to River. A lot of those teams that are in the River to River they broke away from the South Seven Conference. Yeah. You know, Benton, Frankfort. Harrisburg, Heron, those kind of schools were all used to be former members of the South Seven Conference, which is now Althoff, Cahokia, Carbondale, Centralia, Marion, and Mount Vernon. So, you know, who knows? Maybe with the football conference being broken up, you could see kind of maybe a combination of the South Seven and some of those river to river to where you have like two divisions, like a smaller and a larger and stuff like that too. So, because a lot of these schools, I mean, Benton, Frankfort, Harrisburg, Heron, they're either play each other during the regular season or they're in the same, you know, regional. So they basically play each other during the regular season, so you might as well play them, be in a conference with them. Yeah. Now that football's not involved. And,
of course, and we talk about just basketball. Obviously, there are other sports to consider as well, the full program of sports for each school. So other conferences will form, but at least football will be off the table. So these leagues can begin to form. And I really do think there'll be another period of instability, shuffling around until finally things begin to settle down. But we've seen what's happened over the last 40 years. It's all been football driven, all this stuff. And at least that will be off the table. So if another problem crops up, if suddenly basketball turns into a mini version of football, then I guess we'll deal with it. It's sort of like doctors eliminate one disease through research and progress and medication, everything else. And guess what? Something always kills us. There's always that next disease we got to solve. So we get rid of the football problem in IHSA. If there's another problem coming up, then I guess we'll have to solve that.
But you have to give the IHSA and its members some credit, because they at least recognize that there is an issue, there is a problem, they're trying to do something. Like you said, Scott, is this the perfect solution? Well, time will tell on that, but at least they're trying to do something.
Yeah. Well, and again, we go back to the biggest upheaval in all of Illinois prep sports history probably was the creation of basketball classes in the 70s. It was a huge deal at the time, but that was because of a problem. Small schools had trouble competing. And so, in tournament level. And again, as we mentioned, it was an unfair deal back then because you had districts going into the regionals for small schools. So, again, it was a case of a problem. Members, the IHSA is driven by its member schools, and they voted to create class basketball. And now, thus, 40, 50 years later, here they are deciding to fix football now.
I've told this a little bit briefly, too. I remember when class system came to Indiana. It was my junior year was the last year that it was a one-class system over there. And so my senior year in high school, was when they started the 4 classes, and I remember that was a big
ordeal.
It was a big ordeal over in Indiana and everything. And then the IHSAA tried to appease everybody by doing that tournament of champions in basketball, where the 4A winner played the 1A winner, and the 2A winner played the 3A winner, and then basically ended up being a 4A slaughter because, which that didn't last very long. But I remember that. But look at it now. I mean, there are going to be people out there that are going to be naysayers and stuff, but it seemed to be working quite well as well too. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit more locally. We've kind of talked about how the impact around the state. Let's talk a little bit more about the impact locally, Scott. How it could impact Mount Carmel when it comes to football.
Well, I think for starters, there will be more travel. The nice thing about being in the Big 8 for 16 years, there was not much travel. Our farthest opponent was Jasper, an hour away, for conference games. So that was a sweet deal in terms of that. Now, we obviously other problems, but when it came to travel, that was a good deal. I think under district proposals, at least the ones we've seen, and keep in mind the ones that have been published by those in the suburban newspapers and elsewhere that actually have taken the time to go clear through the state and try their best to guess what the IHSA might do with district alignment. Best guesses seem to show us in kind of a division with 4 schools in this area and then 4 schools from an area west and northwest of here. And so obviously that means they would be in the district, depending on how it ends up. It will be sort of 4 and 4 of area schools and those others, and you're probably going to have to travel a couple times a year. The nice thing is that Mount Carmel is used to traveling. Salem is an hour and a half away. We're in the North Egypt Conference. Nobody ever had a problem with that, and we kind of dreaded that trip a little more than others, but and then Flora was over there on the west frontier, too, and they were an hour, about Jasper length away, maybe a little bit more. So, Mount Carmel's, and in fact is, in the playoffs, we're very used to traveling, and we've done it for years and years and years and years and years, and even second and third round games are, way off the beaten path. And then during these last 20 years, in our desperate attempts to find people to play, particularly in week 4, we've gone all over the place as it is. Remember, we went to Mendota in week 9. A few years ago, and Mendota, really, for a regular season game, that's north of Bloomington, way up there. So that's how it impacted us. So I think the travel thing, and it's once a week. You're not. I don't know how we'll do junior varsity and freshman, sophomore. That may be a case of probably not being tied to the district. You just go find people to play in your area, which will be fine, which is just fine. You really, nobody keeps track of freshman wins and losses and JV, so it doesn't make any difference who you play. You just want to get out there and play somebody so you can run your plays, run your system and everything else and teach the kids, and so they can learn from that. But nobody cares about really what happens at that level. So, well, they really don't. I mean, parents do for about a year or two, and they want those articles in the paper and they want those mentions on the radio. And then when their kid's old enough, they stop caring about it.
Yeah. By the way, you can email your complaints to Scott.
Well,
I get what you're saying,
and we both
Scott.
worked in the newspaper, so we deal with that. But it's not that big of a deal. In fact,
as far as the IHSA is concerned, they don't do like a playoffs for junior varsity
they're
or
not
freshman.
They're not going to make you play freshman games inside the district.
And I bet you 100% if you ask a coach, they're probably not too concerned with wins and losses anyway. Wins and losses look nice, but they're more concerned about developing their players and getting them ready for the varsity level. So I don't think, if you ask most JV coaches deep down, they're probably not so concerned about wins and losses. Yeah. So,
And truth is, I've never had a fan going, hey, I know my kid graduated 20 years ago, but I don't see any articles about the freshman. So you've never heard that. So, But anyway, so I don't think that's going to be a fact. So we'll just find a schedule to play.
I think it was Lou Holtz that basically said, nobody cares if you're winning and losing until you start losing. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So that'll take care of itself. So it's not like when you jumbled conferences around, you worried about your young daughter playing on a freshman basketball team in some far off territory on a Monday night. That's what we hated about having to jump conferences, and sometimes what football did to these conferences because of the other aspects of that, the other leagues. So now conferences can get together for all the right reasons. Football's out of the equation. But I think for Mount Carmel, a little bit more travel.
I think it'd be a good point there. I mean, not to beat on this JV stuff, but I think you made a pretty good point there, is because a lot of these schools, they do kind of correspond their varsity and their JV schedules together. But the JV, it's not like basketball where the JV team plays first and the varsity plays second. You have to make two separate trips to those places. And a lot of these teams probably, or a lot of the schools probably don't want to put the expenses of having to travel 2 or 3 times a week to this one location, or back and forth. Sometimes what they do, you'll see that sometimes is like the varsity will play at one place and then that team will come for the JV or something like that. But you could see them scheduling different teams around here to do that. But Scott, one thing that I know you have a copy of it over there is an article, or at least part of an article that a reporter from the Northwest Times did it was actually several months ago when this thing really kind of started getting hot. He kind of projected what he feels could be the district alignment. Now, this is not, I want to remind people that this is not what the IHSA posted, but he went through every school, every district, classified them and everything, and placed them in a district on his own. And Scott and I, we've talked about this. We could see these teams being in that district a little bit. So talk a little bit about what our article here has as far as Mount Carmel goes. Yeah.
Well, he broke everything down, and his idea, his plan would see of course 8 districts in Class 3A. There'll be 8 districts in each of 8 classes. And he had an 8-team district lined up that included Mount Carmel, Newton, Robinson, Fairfield, and then Vandalia, Greenville, Hillsborough, and Litchfield. So that would be our new conference, if you want to call it. It would be District 7 of Class 3A. Okay? So you would have all those teams listed every week in the paper and on the radio. We'd talk about it as if that was your conference. It would be your district, and you'd have district standings and all your games listed. We would have to play everybody in this district every year. It'd be home and away. 2-year cycles, and then the IHSA would alter that every 2 years based on enrollment figures and everything else. So some schools will pop out of a district, some will pop in. You probably always have some changes. Maybe you'd be lucky enough to not have any changes for a few years, but I imagine it's always going to get kind of one leaves, one comes in, whatever the case will be, probably every 2 years for a while. At least that's the way the system would be. So there you go. That's why we kind of envision almost a 4-and-4 thing. Mount Carmel, Newton, Robinson, and Fairfield are all kind of area schools. We played them all, and that could be fine. Those would be nice rivalries as well. And then you're going to throw in maybe a Greenville, Hillsborough, Litchfield, and Vandalia. And granted, we played Greenville. We played Vandalia in the past in the playoffs, and more than once, I think, on each occasion. Well, Greenville, who can forget Greenville, that 71-70 game that we had here in the playoffs. So, and we played them earlier back in the 80s, I think, in the playoffs. So, it's not people that we've never seen, and we know how to get there. We've traveled there in large numbers. So I don't think really, this is a bad proposal. Now, keep in mind, another thing, too, is how many times, and perhaps a lot of our listeners have tried to gauge what they think might be a choice of the IHSA. Hey, everybody loves to do that come football time. I used to take the map out with the push pins and the whole deal. I used to go all the way with that. Of course, you can't even find these atlas maps anymore, but you'd get one and you'd have pins all over the place and you'd try to guess. And you're almost never right, all right? And so the fact that this guy has put this together, it's great. It's a great blueprint. A working document, but the odds are it's probably not going to be right. Yeah. It'll be close.
First off, I just want to say kudos to him for even doing that. I don't know if I'd have the patience to be able to go through every single football team here in Illinois, figuring out what class they are, geographically, where they fit in and everything. I don't think I'd have the patience for that. So.
And even as the IHSA pointed out this week, there's going to be some shuffling now, based on the schools know this is going to start in 2021. For example, we're not sure the Chicago Public League how they'll even do their teams, because some schools, some conferences within the Public League are not eligible for the playoffs, and some are, and they know that going in. So will the CPS suddenly change how they do things and make everybody eligible? Will they cut it back? Will they only get so many slots in theory? So who knows what will happen there?
Do you know if the success factor still is?
Boy, I don't even know on that. I imagine that's separate from that. That's probably still a factor on its own.
Like if you win, if you go so far or win or something like that, you get bumped up into a class and stuff like that. So I guess that's part of the reshuffling.
And you probably couldn't get bumped up except at a 2-year break.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how the success factor will go.
And that's
there.
probably also something I'll have to work out. Yeah. The two things that I like the most about this, to be honest with you, the whole district proposal is, one, you know who you're going to, you know what class you're in before the season starts, which 80% of the schools know anyway. I mean, we've pretty well known the last few years Mount Carmel's been 3A, but they have not always been 3A. And some years, there's been at least a couple when we thought we'd be 4A and we ended up in 3A and vice versa. So right now our enrollment's kind of safely in 3A, but it hasn't always been that way. So the nice thing is you will know now, at least on a 2-year basis, what class you'll be in. Mm-hmm. That's nice. I think the nicest thing about this is that come Saturday night of the playoff pairings night, well, like we have been here recently a couple times, not knowing if you're going to get in or not, and sweating it out and waiting, and then finding out you didn't make it. Now, granted, with playoff points, you kind of had an idea, but until it actually was the announcement from the IHSA whether you made it or not, you didn't know. That probably will no longer be the case. I imagine that on that Friday night of your last game, you'll know if you're in or not. You have to finish in the top 4 of your district to get in. Doesn't mean it'll be cut and dried. There'll be tiebreaker rules and everything else. There'll be teams that are tied in the standings and everything else. But I'm sure each district, maybe IHSA mandated, will have a tiebreaker procedure in process. Here's option 1, option 2, option 3, option 1 probably being head-to-head, and then go on from there. And so the nice thing is you'll know that night whether you're in or not, as opposed to waiting till Saturday. So those are two real pros, I think, as we talk about advantages and disadvantages for this. And I think probably disadvantage would be a travel, as we've talked about that too. So, and I think one of the guys here is in an article has talked about the unknown. We're all kind of going into this blind. We'll have a better idea next year. I believe the IHSA is expected to begin to outline what their thoughts are, right, about we saw something on the webpage 2019-20. They'll begin to offer some guidance on what the districts would look like. It'll be just like waiting to see where you end up in basketball now. They have that release on that certain day, and everybody always talk coaches, well, I think they'll send us here. And we never know what's going to happen. So I think there'll be a little bit about that. And
like you mentioned, too, these will be probably 7 or 8 team districts, leaving schools to have 2 games, for the most part, 2 games that they'll be able to schedule on their own or through other schools that won't count toward the district. So it I think from everything that I've seen, a couple of things, I've not heard anything officially from the IHSA. Granted, I've not read everything, but from a lot of the media I've talked to, it's the first 2 weeks of the season. A couple of media outlets have said that these will be open dates for you to be able to schedule anybody that you want to, as far as that don't count against your district. And I wondered about that too, because let's say we have an 8-team district assignment. So that means 7 district games, and you've got 2 left. Now the River to River does week 1 and week 9 for non-conference. I kind of like that. The Apollo Conference used to, and I don't even know what they do now, but back when I was in Charleston, they would front load, and you wouldn't play your conference games until the end. So you would play 2, 3, whatever it was, straight weeks of non-conference before you got in. So, and Edgy Tim, and I know there's an article you're talking about. Edgy Tim, of course, is a well-known figure in media in Illinois prep for the last, I don't know how many years. But NBC Sports Chicago, I think that's a TV station, NBC Sports Chicago, one of the channels up there. They had an article on their website about it, and they used him as an example of a quote. No. He wrote the article, and he used Joliet Catholic, the AD there, Dan Sharp, as kind of a source. But and so I think at some point either Edgy Tim or Dan Sharp talks about playing the non-conference games up front, and that would be an advantage, and it would be. So, but I just didn't have any feeling for whether they were going to front load the non-conference or spread them out. Some will have 3 non-conference dates, some districts. So, did you see anything officially from the IHSA that seemed to indicate how they'll do it? I don't think they went that far as to get into policy. But I think having it first have
it would make sense.
It would make sense because, if you put it toward the end, then there's really nothing to play for down to the end. But if you have your week 8s and week 9s as your district game, then hopefully you have something to play for and it'd be more meaningful games as opposed to,
And that way you get all your non-conference, if it's 2-3 weeks, you get to fine-tune everything, you work out the bugs, games that don't even hurt you in the playoffs. So now you can try things. You can do things probably during the non-conference games under the district proposal that you would never do even in a non-conference setting for the regular season because you still have those wins to worry about. So you can try things. Maybe put a freshman in a quarterback and test the waters. I mean, who knows what the scenario would be. But the fact is they won't count against you, and you've got 3 weeks to tune up for the conference season. So, that's another good – I mean, who knows? Who'd like that? Who wouldn't like that? And some conferences are locked in. I don't think anybody that was in one of those leagues like that, except they made it easy for ADs and principals. They don't have to schedule anybody because they don't have to find anybody to play. But I don't think anybody will love that idea because you're worried about your whole conference collectively getting bad together and not knowing it until you hit the playoffs. So now the IHSA is taking you out of the problem there.
You had an opportunity, Scott, yesterday to talk with Mount Carmel Athletic Director Tyler Buss after their win at the Toyota Classic against Gibson Southern. And yes, we will be talking about basketball. So if you're, but just the big news is football. So, but you had an opportunity to talk with Tyler. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, very, I don't want to say surprising. I just think there was a lot of anticipation to see. I think everybody kind of thought it would be close. I don't know if we thought it would be as close as what it was, but, again, it seems like, for the last several years, it's something that the state has wanted to do something with football. And it just seemed like finally they ripped the Band-Aid off this year and got the support they needed to get it done. And, there's still a lot of questions and, still a lot of stuff that needs to kind of be figured out and answered before we can be, yay excited about it or mad about it. I think, we'll kind of get some more answers as time goes. But, again, it's something that will definitely create more work when I have my AD hat on, that's for sure. But it's something that, I think the state has the best interests of its members in mind. And it's something that, we're looking forward to tackling a new challenge.
So right there, like I said, you heard from Tyler Buss yesterday. So just your thoughts about his reaction there, Scott, as far as what he had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably voiced similar concerns to a lot of ADs, and you could hear it too. From the functional part of his job, there will be a lot of unknown. He's not sure but keep in mind. Yeah, ADs at Mount Carmel have had to work harder than probably other ADs around the area because of our instability situation in the Big 8. Well, we went years we couldn't find anybody to play in Week 4. We went through all kinds of detail. We gave Week 4 away a couple times just to find people to play. We went to Wood Memorial twice in a row back in the early aughts just because they agreed to play us. And we gave them the gate both years. Here, you take, please, just play us. And we brought in the St. Louis school one year, St. Louis Gateway. Then we decided to get in cahoots with the Corn Belt Conference and play their Week 4 bye team. And for 2 years, we played Rantoul, I think. Was it Pontiac or Rantoul? Anyway, I think it was Rantoul. And we played Rantoul for 2 years. And then we played Bloomington Central Catholic for 2 years. What a great deal that was. And we almost beat them 1 year. Then we were all set to play Muhammad Seymour when they were still in the Corn Belt, but they never got to that because then the Corn Belt realigned, probably because of football again, members moving in and out, and that dropped that whole bye arrangement. Then luckily we found Breeze Mater Dei because they were in the same boat we were, and we agreed to play each other and did for 6 years in a row. So that kind of solved Week 4. But I think there were 5 straight years, either 4 or 5 straight years, we had a different opponent in Week 4 all those years. That's an athletic director's nightmare. And so first of all, and that predates Tyler, of course, in the position, but that just goes to show you the problems that Mount Carmel had that a lot of other schools in this area didn't have. Because meanwhile, all the other NEC schools went their separate ways, and here's the nice, happy little Black Diamond, and here's the nice, happy little LIC, though they've been pushed and pulled a little bit too. And so nobody was an independent, which we were actually in the IHSA's eyes. We were an independent. Luckily, we got in the Big 8. Thank goodness for that. What a great lifeboat the Big 8 has been over the years. But But so he's talking about the functionality challenges of his job, which have always been there for Mount Carmel more than any other school in this area for several years now, more than a decade and almost 2 decades. So that's something to consider. But yeah, so there's an unknown. The good thing is the IHSA will tell you, here's who you're going to play, and schools are used to making that stuff work. Once they get the schedule linked, then the logistics go into it. So he's done that 1,000 times with schools and buses and transportation and issues, and so he'll handle that well. But in terms of the initial reaction, yeah, it's scary. It's something new until we get to it and iron it out, and there'll be parts of it we'll never like, and but there's parts of the current arrangement in other sports we don't like. So yeah, it's just what it is, and the sooner we get down to it, probably the better. And as far as officials, granted, those contracts are several years out in football. Well, they'll switch them. They'll get them aligned.
They'll make adjustments.
We'll exchange this date in 2021 for what we thought would be Washington with 2021 for Greenville or whatever. So that'll work itself out, I think, in the end. Another
comment that Scott or Tyler said to Scott yesterday was he talked about the Big 8 conference, because that's going to be, I think that's going to be if not the number one question, at least the 1A question of what's going to happen to the Big 8 conference. And again, I mean, Tyler doesn't know. It's way too early to know exactly how this is going to impact the Big 8 conference, but he had nothing but complimentary things to say about the Big 8 conference, how the Big 8 conference basically opened its doors to them when they were without a conference. I'm sure it probably met a need for both. Big 8 conference probably needed another school, and Mount Carmel needed a conference to play in. But Tyler was nothing but complimentary about how beneficial it's been for Mount Carmel. Now, yeah, you can say that there's been some struggles in the Big 8 conference, but overall, Tyler had nothing but good things to say about Big 8 conference.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. It's been a great home for us. I think, but the nice thing is that it's not exactly as if the Big 8 admitting Mount Carmel was a lifesaver for us. First of all, we'd have found our way through life as an independent. It was great for us, but what I would like to say is that I think we needed them as much as they needed us. I mean, they're down to 6 members and everything else. But here's the deal, is, the more I think about this, and I don't have anything to go on it, and I haven't talked to any school officials about this or anything else, but, I think we'll get out, period, of the Big 8. And here's why. I'd hate to see us get out in basketball, to be honest with you. It's been great for us. I think the Big 8 has helped us more in basketball than football. In football, we knew how to get there from here. From the NEC. We made it to Bloomington. We made it to Champaign from the NEC. So that didn't impede us or anything else. And the level was good enough competitive-wise to make it. But I think where we saw the difference in basketball, granted, we may have had some better talent here come along. But what was the bigger gyms, the bigger sizes, the fact that, let's be honest, and we've seen this, there's clear evidence to support this. So sorry, I'm from Illinois. I'm an Illinois boy. But let's be honest, the Indiana schools at this end of the state are better than we are. And not saying game to game. On any given night, anything can happen. I remember back in the 80s, McLeansboro was number 1. They went on to Robert Stadium and beat Boise in Evansville in a packed house. It was a great ball game, and I was all for Southern Illinois, so I thought it was a great night. But week in, week out, no, we can't compete. And just to show you, what are we in the Big 8 all time? 25-66? And yet, look what we've done. That's a terrible, it's not a good percentage. And yet, we still made it to Peoria and made it to the state finals. And I think it was because of how tough we had to be. And so we're getting killed in the Big 8, and yet look what we did in Illinois. If we'd ever, what was the line I used on the air 2-3 years ago? If we ever get to the point where we win the Big 8 in basketball, boys basketball, you can mail us the Illinois 2A championship trophy because we'll be that good. And you know what? We almost were that good. I mean, we got second. We lost to Washington on the last night of the regular season in 2017. And guess what? We got to the state championship game. So that's how tough the Big 8 made us.
Well, you just said that if you win the conference, you're going to win the state championship.
And so
because
you
came second. You came in second instead.
Yeah.
So
in the years that we know we're very good in the Big 8 in basketball, that we know we're going to be okay. But we've seen that. Our records have mirrored each other on many occasions. As good in Illinois as we are bad in Indiana, And it may be forming up this year again like that too, unfortunately. But we've seen that several times. And so it's made us tougher. But the reason I think we'll get out is the other sports. Baseball, we have very few wins to show for our years in the Big Eight. We are competitive occasionally on games, but as a rule, season to season, we haven't been. Softball, we're doing a much better job trying to rev the program up, but it's a slow go, and it's been made slower by the fact that we've got to go get pounded by those Big Eight conference schools in softball. Track doesn't help us at all being in the Big Eight. Wrestling's been great, and I think we're going to find out that we're doing well in the Big Eight this year. We may win the Big Eight. What it's going to mean to us in the postseason, we'll see that. So that's been good. I think that we can continue to schedule these people. So to be honest with you, we might have to get out of the Big Eight anyway, because if they've got a bylaw that says you got to play the major sports, then we're done anyway.
Here's my thing.
But I don't think we're going to even try to stay in basketball.
I totally agree with you, because to me, there is no benefit to competing in the Big Eight Conference anymore. Now, does that mean you don't compete against these teams? You still might schedule Lincoln or Princeton. Or something like that, but you don't need to play them in a conference game anymore. And like we've talked about this as well too. You're only playing, 6? Is it right? 6 games, because there's 7 teams in the conference.
16, yeah.
16. So you're only playing a limited number of games. So you can easily.
It's not like our schedule's going to be empty.
Exactly. You could probably find some teams around here that can schedule that, or again, you can still play Jasper or Lincoln, or you can keep a rivalry with Princeton if you want to do that. So there's really no benefit of staying in that conference in the Big Eight. Again, you could still play those teams if you want to, and if they agree as well. I mean, I like teams that are in conference, because I think it's good for the kids to play for a conference championship. Yeah. So I hope that they can get attached to a conference here. I think it's probably not going to happen overnight. I think, like you mentioned too, it might take a little while. I can't imagine people are just going to be like, "Oh, there's no football, so yeah, come on, Mount Carmel, you can come and be in whatever conference it is, or let's reform this conference." I mean, it's going to be a lot. There's more to it than just breaking up a conference and reforming something. I mean, something's got to happen.
And of course, everybody initially thinks, "Oh, let's get the NEC back together. This is now the way to get the North Egypt Conference." It's amazing how that league has become a part of our thought processes in the 16 years now that it's been gone. It is still just as much a part of us as it was. I'm always amazed by the sticking power of the conference. But to think that immediately everybody will just fall in place now that football's out of the equation. Oh, let's get back together, kumbaya. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think we could eventually find ourselves in probably some semblance of that, because obviously geographically these are the towns that are around here. Everybody was good in the NEC, except I think everybody in the NEC in the years that I've been alive has gone to state. Even Bridgeport went as the Bulldogs, except after the NEC was gone, Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel never went from 55 on. Now, granted, I didn't come to Mount Carmel until 79, and Red Hill and Bridgeport went in the early 60s with that phenomenal team they had. But I think everybody else went to state. Maybe not Carmi, but I'm not even sure on that. I have to look. Flora went to state. Well, anyway, we can go on through that list. But so the NEC's been a fine basketball league. I think they can almost stand to get back together. I don't think it'll happen. I think we could get close to that, even if that's what we're aiming for. But, who knows? Or maybe Robinson or Newton are in a league in the future. At some point, I think we'll come together and they'll admit us in, because not just for basketball, but the other sports as well.
Absolutely. So going back to the non-district games, Scott, just based on your opinion, your thoughts, what you would like to see, who would you like to see Mount Carmel schedule in those two non-district games? And it could be basically anybody from that schedule anybody there. So who would you like to see? But based on what the schedule is currently right now, who would you like to see Mount Carmel continue to play?
Well, I would think number one would be Harrisburg. That series began because of successful playoff games we had in 80 and 83. They were so well attended, so well played. I think school officials then they both had openings. Like, hey, let's get together. I think about 85 that series started, and it's been going ever since. It's a great indicator for coaches. At least it was for years. I think both coaches felt it was a perfect game. It was non-conference, but both teams were powerful enough that you would get a good feel for where you were going into that. And now it'd be even more of a perfect game in a non-district setting because now it doesn't even hurt you if you lose that game. I mean, now it still hurts because you don't get a win. But it wouldn't even matter in the future. So it can, in a strange sort of way, add a little bit luster to the game because now, as I mentioned, you can try things, you can do things, you can experiment, you can have because all the pressure's off even for a win. But yet you can, and so you can schedule big teams. You can schedule a lot bigger schools. I think there's several towns. Sterling comes to mind. There's Rock Island. There's other communities where the smaller private schools can now play the big city schools in matchups that the fans want to see in those towns, but could never happen currently. Freeport, Aquin, and Freeport in some sports. And now, granted, Aquin doesn't play football, but things like that. Sterling, as I mentioned, Newman versus Sterling High. Matchups you never see now, but you could see in the future under non-district because of the fact that it wasn't hurt you. And you'd get great crowds out for those games. So, and there's lots of those games around the state. So I think those matchups can happen. That's not really a thing for us down here, but I think Harrisburg for sure. I think the Olney game has turned interesting. I don't believe Olney will be in our class. I don't see a scenario in which that would happen based on any of the proposals we're seeing. I think they'll be a class above us. Enrollment, they're over 700 still. And we're down at, and by the way, the enrollment being used, at least for the next 2 years, is 488 for us. So we're getting down there. So I don't see any way that Olney will end up anywhere near us in a classification. So we could play them in a non-district game. Boy, it's close. It's close. Teams, Olney was good last year. I'm still amazed we won by the score we did. I wasn't even sure we were going to win, but we played well that night. So both have good fan bases, and Olney, as I mentioned, is getting a little better now in football again. So, I think it'd be a perfect matchup. So those would be the two. But we could go off and do Breeze Mater Day again if we ever felt the urge, because now the pressure's off. It's not such a tough game. And here, let's bring up. You and I both referenced a reaction by Salem's head football coach, Kevin Green, and I just want to take because he brought up some good points, but one of the points I don't know if I agreed with, and it was on and help me with this. It was later in the response where he talks about the idea that he's got a younger son that's got to come up through the ranks, and he's worried that under this proposal it'll create a tougher situation for his youngster and too much pressure to win games. Am I right on something like that? Without having to call that up here live while we're on the air. But actually, I think he got that wrong. I think it's the exact opposite. I think there'll be less win at all cost pressure because those will be we'll have non-district games.
Yeah, I think here's what he said. My middle, this is Kevin Green. He's the head football coach at the Salem Community High School. And he said, my middle son is currently in 7th grade. He will be a sophomore when this begins, the district. It makes me sad he will not have the opportunity to compete in an IHSA football season where every game is do or die. Every game has postseason implications.
So I read that wrong. He actually is upset that there won't be do or die implications with every game. It's 2 games. I mean, I think I still don't know if I don't
necessarily agree with that
because he's basically saying I don't mind the way it is now.
But the thing is,
what's the problem is the way it is now.
Here's my thing also too is like you mentioned, you said a while ago, and I understand what you meant about if they played Harrisburg, it won't matter. Well, it does matter.
It'll still matter for the kids.
You meant for district. Sure. It won't matter for district.
No, they will still be trying hard.
Oh my goodness, yes. There'll still be pride on the line. You still want to win.
Undefeated.
Nobody wants to lose and all that kind of stuff. So to say that there's nothing to really play for,
but from an overarching kind of
it's not do or die this week. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that as well too. So he's another one's like I understand and emphasize with schools who struggle to find schedules and conference homes. That being said, I can tell you how fearful I am of what district football will do to the IHSA football. This is going to massively change our game like nothing before. So apparently, Scott, as far as I know, Scott, even when the district play comes around, you still have to get 10 yards for a first down. Touchdowns are still going to be worth 6 points. There's still going to be 11 men on the field. I mean, it's not going to drastically change football, right, Scott? I mean,
No.
they didn't. I know they'd made some changes to 8-man football, which I would love to see 8-man football, but it's more probably the Northern and stuff like that too. But I mean, it's not going to drastically change the way the game of football is played. I mean, I think that's being a little bit over dramatic right there.
And I only referenced that because, first of all, I guess I misunderstood the actual answer. So I'm glad I got to address it because I didn't really listen to until you two read that back to me. But first of all, Salem's coach is doing a great job there with the Wildcats. I mean, they're starting to feel better about themselves now. The program's definitely in an upswing. They're in a new conference. And
because they're not in
else.
Apollo, basically.
Yeah.
They're not playing Mohammed Seymour. They're not.
But guess what? Now they're going to still play. But now they're going to have to go back and because they're in a smaller league now. But they're going to have to go back and play schools their size. So I don't have the problem is that it's a tough spot to be in if you're a coach or an AD. You're saying, well, I don't like this. But if you're going to play schools your size, then what do you got to argue about, really, in the scheme of things? The fact is, if any school in particular is who they want to be, then they certainly should be able to beat schools in their area that are their size. Nobody's talking about going and playing Belleville out. Nobody's talking about Belleville West. But if Salem's going to be good at the state level, they're going to have to beat teams from their area. They certainly will in the playoffs. And so now your whole regular season is going to be teams that are your size. So. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think individually some schools are going to be irked at where they're put district-wise, but they're going to have to compete against these people anyway in the postseason, so why not make it the regular season now? And, the IHSA, I don't think, is going to do anything to purposely target a school or a situation. I don't think they ever have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be amazed to find out even instances, and they've had years to do that, and to have issues with that, if anybody ever would, because they schedule basketball teams for postseason every year. So, but the fact is, you haven't heard anything like that. Yeah. So I would never think the IHSA is going to, and they're not going to mess on a school in Southern Illinois that they know nothing about. So it's just they're just geographically pairing them up, doing the best they can, and it goes from there. So so I in essence, I still kind of take issue with some of that comment. And which he's perfectly entitled to. And there'll be others like him. And there have been others like him that already posted their reactions. And but it is what it is. And just better to be proactive and attack it and go from there, too.
So let's I think we've kind of touched base on that a little bit. And I'm sure there'll probably be more we can talk about later on. But before we wrap up the show here, because I know I've got to be heading out here pretty soon. I know you've got some things to do as well, too. Let's go ahead and kind of touch base a little bit about some basketball. A mere 52 minutes into our podcast here. We'll talk a little basketball.
We do the shortest podcast, don't we?
Exactly. Well, we haven't quite touched the Four Guys podcast. They did over an hour one time. But
well, I was listening to a Post-Dispatch podcast here a few weeks ago, and they spent the first 2-3 minutes messing with the equipment on the podcast. So, hey, at least we were smooth sailing once we started anyway, Paul.
Well, it's because I was running it. If you were running it, Scott, it probably
would
be. Still.
Well, I am old. Yeah, I'm getting old and not getting any younger.
The Gibson County tournament started last night. Let's go and look at some scores here. Wood Memorial 70, Evansville Christian 34, and then Mount Carmel played 2 games as well, too. The boys and the girls. The girls fell in their game yesterday to Gibson Southern, 77 to. It says here 77-34. Is that right? It's what John Harrell says.
77-37, I think.
77. We'll go with what Scott Allen, because he was actually there. That's what I thought it was. But and then the boys came around with a 41-29 victory last night there. Your thoughts about both of those games coming through? First off, starting with the girls.
Well, Gibson Southern is very impressive. This Meredith Rayleigh girl, she had 33 points last night. I think, or was it 38? It was 38. Yeah, the new single-game scoring record for Gibson Southern. And as was set last night by Rayleigh. She was something, 6 foot, and she plays much bigger than that. Now, she did hit a 3, I believe, so she's not afraid to step outside the arc line, but she spends most of her time inside. She was a terror on the boards last night, too. And for the longest time, I don't think she missed a shot. So she was impressive. It was going to be a challenge. We knew that going in, a challenge for us. But, boy, Gibson Southern chops. They're a nice little ball club, and they're 9-3. And guess what? It's Indiana. So there you go. Now, in the boys' game, how about Mount Carmel? An impressive 12-point win, began to pull away at the end. And it was a tough challenge for Mount Carmel. They like to get up and down the floor. Tyler Buss's teams like to force the action and transition quickly and turn the game speed up is what we like to do. We couldn't do that last night. We could when we got the chance, but Gibson Southern is a much more patient team. They prefer the half court. They prefer to sit on the ball. And as patient as they were, we managed not only to morph into this other half-court kind of a ball club, but our defense was outstanding last night. As patient as Gibson Southern wants to be, they couldn't find anything. And suddenly the possessions were turning into a minute 30 before they would really get something going. So give kudos to Mount Carmel's defense. They played very well last night, really forcing Gibson Southern. They didn't abandon their play style because this is actually what they like to do, but really altered their play style because they couldn't do it even as quickly as they wanted to do, which isn't very quick at all, but you get the gist. So an impressive win for Mount Carmel. Austin Rager, they did a good job on Rager. He still managed to just free himself up by just sheer ability alone and the way we were kind of setting picks for him in the second half. We adjusted, but
well, here's the thing. Gibson
finally freed himself up a little bit in the second half.
Gibson Southern had some size, and we talked about yesterday the Singer kid. He's a big kid in there. I was really impressed by that. I mean, one of the first possessions Gibson Southern had, they pounded it in him, and I thought, boy, if they get the ball into him, it's going to be tough. But Mount Carmel's defense basically denied him pretty much the whole time by doubling and triple team. So he really didn't have a lot of touches. So I thought they did a really good job defensively, keeping the ball from Singer in there, which I mean you mentioned several times yesterday is a name that a lot of the Mount Carmel people will know. Singer out there. So
Noah's a good guy. Yeah, he's good. And in fact, Taylor, his sister, is a freshman. Mm-hmm. She was on that state tournament team. Yeah, and she's playing at Gibson Southern
which
too.
I found that really weird. I was like, I didn't realize that. I guess she had a brother. I remember covering her at 8th grade here in Mount Carmel, and then when I went to softball and covered Gibson Southern when they were playing down there, she was there in Gibson Southern. I'm like, did she transfer or something? But I guess apparently she must live in a place to where she can go to the elementary school here and go to high school. So I don't know. I'm not trying to. I thought that was kind of weird. Then you kind of mentioned that her brother goes there as well. So it's like, it must be just one of those things.
Yeah. So and Noah's had a great finish to the career here at Gibson Southern that he's had for Nick Hart, and so now and I imagine you're going to hear a lot of stuff from the younger Singer, from Ms. Singer, now as she advances her basketball career too. Yeah, you'll hear a lot of good stuff.
It kind of seems to me, from what I listened to on the radio, Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It just seems like Mount Carmel, the girls had a hard time transition defense. It seemed like Gibson Southern scored a lot of transition baskets on the defentive end. It seemed like they struggled a little bit on that.
Well, and I think Gibson Southern's just so good at it. I think they just beat us down the floor a lot too. But and we're a pretty quick team. When we get free and get open, we like to get up and down the court too. But boy, the Gibson Southern team is just flat really good at what they were doing. And then you've got a guy like Rayleigh who can finish so easily and so smoothly on that transition, on the lead stuff that it made life even tougher for Mount Carmel. So, that's 6 losses in a row now. They want to try to get out of it tomorrow against Princeton in the second round. Mount Carmel plays Princeton also in the boys' half of that doubleheader.
They flip-flop, though, now. The boys will play first, and the girls will play second.
So keep that in mind as well. And then we'll wait and see till the end of the pool play on Thursday to find out where we play on Saturday on the final day. Remember, there's just 6 teams in the Toyota Teamwork Classic this year, so there'll be a 5th-place game, 3rd-place game, and championship. And girls and boys. The girls will go before the boys in each one of those rounds. And that is at Wood Memorial at Oakland City on Saturday. Good gym, nice place, good people. So it'll be a nice place. Our final year of the Toyota Teamwork Classic, by the way.
Yep, and then we've talked a little bit about this. The boys will go to Pinckneyville, and the girls now are
apparently Fairfield.
They're going to Fairfield, so I think that's going to be a good tournament for them too. So let's go ahead and close things out here a little bit. Talk a little bit about the wrestling team. Wrestling team is having a very impressive year, which I don't think anybody's too surprised by that. We knew that they were going to be a pretty good team. And this is courtesy of Evan Merrill from the Mount Carmel Register. We've had an opportunity to talk with Evan several times. We're
both alums of there.
Yes, exactly. So we don't hold any real feelings to.
No, Evan's a good guy.
Evan's a good guy, so we appreciate everything that he's doing. And this is a write-up that he had from the Cumberland tournament that the Aces won for the second year in a row. 6 Aces finished first in their weight classes, leading Mount Carmel wrestling team to a championship at the Mount Carmel or the Cumberland tournament last Saturday at Cumberland High School. The victory marks their second tournament victory of the season and placed them as back-to-back champions of the Cumberland tournament. Mount Carmel finished first with a score of 235 among their group of 4 schools. Robinson finished second with 182.5. And so basically pretty much a convincing victory right there. Mount Carmel Cade Kibis won 113-pound weight class. Dayton Hall, 120-pound class. Chevy Wood, 132 pounds. Nate Critchfield, 152 pounds. Chris Shelby, 170 pounds. And Ryan Johnson, 180-pound weight class as well, too. So pretty impressive so far. And it says here, we were talking about this with another successful tournament in the books. Mount Carmel will face Lawrenceville next. The match will be at Lawrenceville today at 6 o'clock. So I guess they play again tonight, Wednesday night. But pretty impressive so far for the wrestling team.
Yeah, and a good job, too. I think they're going to be in Petersburg this weekend for a major invite there in the Springfield area, Petersburg Porta. And so that'll be a good – they'll see a lot of good teams there and a lot of teams they may see later on down the line. And more than anything else, it gets – because it's at a different part of the state, it gets the kids a chance to wrestle against some opponents they may see in the regional and or sectional, and they'll get a look at. And, boy, that's just so key for these kids to get on the mat against these kids, to see what their moves are, to see what they need to do. And so sometimes it's a great benefit. And it varies wrestler to wrestler, actually. But in some cases, it's great that you get to see some of these kids on the mat before the postseason. So, and it's a chance to get away and see some faces, teams, opponents you haven't seen before on top of that. And you know, a little bit of a bonding experience whenever the kids get to leave town together en masse as a group and be together, represent the city and town and school. And so... And all that goes with that, so it's a bonding thing for the kids as well too. It's at Petersburg Porta near Springfield this weekend.
Well, Scott, anything we want to? Have we pretty much covered everything that we needed to? Is there anything else that we need to kind of cover? I know coming up we've got. I know the junior high girls will have their regional stuff coming up in early January. We'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit about that coming up. And then
St. Mary's has a diocesan tournament next month, right after the new year. And they had senior 8th grade night already at St. Mary's last night. And so after the New Year's, they'll head to Belleville for that tournament too.
So hopefully maybe if we get some information on that, if we can remember.
Mark Zimmerman, he keeps us up on St. Mary's. So I'll be right
so
there.
We'll basically have some of that too. But well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of our Talking Aces podcast. For Scott Allen, I'm Paul Wilcoxen.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everyone. We will see you, well, I wish I could say next week, but...
maybe in the new year.
Yeah, something like that. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.